Welcome back, everybody. Well, this pandemic has brought on market volatility like we have almost never seen before, and millions of job losses. And with talk of maybe a second wave coming around the corner, how are we to prepare financially? Well, we've got just the person to guide us through this. She is CTV's chief financial commentator, the one and only Pattie Lovett-Reid. We need your words of wisdom today.
Thanks for having me, both of you.
We love having you, Patty. So, as Mel mentioned, about 3 million jobs were lost, and that's between February and April, and only about half of them have been recouped. So, do people need to worry about a second wave bringing on perhaps even more layoffs?
I think that's a great question. And since all of the job losses, the pandemic going back to, let's call it February, still 1.1 million people don't have a job. So that's a concern. We're heading into the fall. We don't know for sure if it's a second wave or it's an increase in cases of COVID-19. But here's what I can tell you. What keeps me up at night right now is when I think back to the start of the year, the number of companies who put out their projections, they did their profiles based on the fact that revenues were going to be coming in. In many cases, those revenues have not lived up to expectations. And what that means is they're going to have to cut costs. They have to answer to their shareholders, and cutting costs means job losses. We didn't see it at the height of the pandemic from a lot of large corporations. And my fear is the fall is going to be a big challenge for a lot of companies, and as a result, a lot of individuals.
Oh boy. Okay, so this is where the
I know.
government stepped in. There's the CERB, there is employment insurance, but all of these are really sort of temporary fixes, and at some point they will end. So, what happens if the job market at that point is still weak and you don't have the governmental safety net as some people do now? What happens?
Well, it's going to be a challenging position for sure, Mel. There's no question about it. The government is transitioning people from the Canada Emergency Response Benefit onto EI. There will be people who qualify for EI who might not have otherwise. For example, those who maybe have to stay at home to care for their children, and they may not have had benefits in the past. But to your point, this is going to be for about a year as it stands today. And so, yes, there will come what I call a day of reckoning for a lot of households. As well, what we've also seen is mortgage deferrals will come to an end. In the middle of the pandemic, creditors didn't come calling because they knew so many people wouldn't be able to pay, but they likely will. And because we've been in lockdown and working from home, there are families that have actually become a little more flush with cash because they haven't had to meet those debt obligations that they might have to, will have to in the not too distant future. And so all of this is
Mm.
going to hit like a perfect storm.
Wow. So, that being said, Patty, preparation has to be key. So, if people need to prepare for the worst case scenarios, or at least for some sort of uncertainty, what do you recommend is the first step that they take?
Well, I think you need to understand where you stand financially. How much money do you have coming in? What does your debt situation look like? Understand where you're spending your money. And this is where you can start to lay out a plan. I've been talking to Canadians, and I know for a fact that those people who haven't been spending money where they used to in the past, going out for dinner, for travel, for entertainment, they've been saving that money. So there will be some that will get through this, and there will be others living very close to the margin where it becomes a challenge. But you can't reach out for help if you don't know where you stand financially. So I think that's the first place to start.
Okay, so let's say everyone's going to follow everything that you say. They've taken stock of their situation today. The next step after taking stock is taking charge. So, what is the
Right.
next step after that?
All right. So I do think households, regardless of who you are and where you stand financially, set some financial goals for themselves. No one likes a budget. I get it. And so as a result, maybe you decide that you're going to tuck a little money aside. You have that emergency fund. The money is there. You try not to touch it. Maybe some people can't do that. And so instead, what they do is they maybe get a line of credit. They have a credit card that they don't use, so they have access to it should they need it. Others are out there saying, okay, I'm going to create a side hustle. I'm going to try to figure out a way to have money coming in. I also can tell you the secondhand economy, people are buying and selling, and it is becoming a booming business.
So you've spoken to us before about, an emergency fund and putting money aside. When you're
Right.
actually building it, how much do you need, Patty?
Marcy, I used to say 3 to 6 months living expenses tucked aside, available for you should you need it. And I think, given the crisis that we've been through, I've been unrealistic about saying that that's what people should have. I think anyone who can save a few things, look at your income statement. And what I mean by that is how much money you have coming in, what is it you're spending your money on, and cancel one thing, one subscription. Maybe it's a gym membership. Maybe it's the cable. I don't like to say that, but maybe whatever it is you're spending your money on, take that money and tuck it aside. What you want to do for yourself is give yourself a little financial flexibility. No one's going to judge you if you have 3 to 6 months living expenses. In a perfect world, great, but we're not in a perfect world right now.
Okay, so let's go even further there, because maybe people say, yeah, not only is it not a perfect world, I've already been impacted pretty severely financially because of COVID-19. Let's go further into those potential savings to create a little bit more breathing room.
Well, if I were to dig a little deeper, I would suggest that rather than giving yourself a budget, give yourself a spending plan. That means, what am I going to spend on a weekly basis or a monthly basis? And that's it. And, no one's going to say how you should spend that money or what you should spend it on, but know what those numbers are. If you are in over your head, this is where you might want to reach out and get some credit counseling, some support to say, okay, how can I sort of put the pause button on interest payments right now? Help me structure a repayment plan. My fear is, come the fall, that when everything sort of comes to an end or something happens in a particular household, we have not seen bankruptcies here in Canada on the rise, and we could in fact start to see that. But nobody wants that to happen. So it's about creating a realistic plan in your household to get you through. And finding a job doesn't have to be a perfect job. It's a job to help you pay the bills right now. It's not your forever job. And so sometimes it's about bridging a gap.
Yeah, and preparation is what you're talking about. So, what about portfolios? In terms of people's
Mhm.
portfolios, what should they be looking at right now ahead of what could be, Patty, a potentially volatile time in the markets?
Well, the markets, Marcy, have really recovered much faster than many would have thought. And so there is extreme volatility for sure. There's something that we often say on an individual basis: look at your time horizon and your tolerance for risk. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to do nothing with your portfolio. But if you have more exposure than you should have in a portfolio, ask yourself, how much am I willing to lose here? And how much can I afford to lose? Because the answer to those questions can be very different depending on who you are. I can tell you, in our household, we've looked over our portfolio more than once over the last few months, and we're happy with the composition of what we have in cash, in fixed income like bonds, as well as the stock market. But in a perfect world, you want to have about a 5-year time horizon if you're going to go into the market, because when you make an investment, we ask ourselves, does it make sense in the next 10 minutes, in the next 10 months, in the next 10 years?
Those are great, great things to ask. Okay, so
Mhm.
finally, if people are thinking, okay, I'm either employed, maybe I'm underemployed, what could they be doing to make themselves more attractive to a potential employer, maybe boosting skills for another job later down the line?
You know what? I think it's that situation where you put your hand up and you say, "I'll do it. I'm available. What do you need done?" It's about knowing that the doors will be closed on more than one occasion, but ultimately, the harder you look and the more you look, something will open up. I was sort of encouraged by hearing that Amazon, for example, is hiring 2,500 full-time positions. Some people may say, I may not want to work in a fulfillment center, but others will say, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I'm going to do right now. And I'm getting my application in. So, depending on who you are, yes, retraining is going to be required. But it's also about having that positive attitude that you're going to get through this. And I think you will. You just have to be prepared to do what I believe sometimes others aren't prepared to do, and take the job that you can get.
Pattie, wise words, great tips. Thank you so much for
Oh,
joining us
thank you.
today.
Thanks for having me.
We're back right after this.